Oh, you joined me. Hold on a sec. Let me get the light. There we go. Yes, I was just sitting here in the dark, waiting. Not creepy at all. Glad you made it. Take a few seconds to get comfy and maybe grab your favorite John Stamos body pillow and assume the big spoon position. How about we put a little burning fireplace in that bottom right corner for some ambient noise? Fireplace, please. Guys, the fireplace. There it is, splendid. Hard to find good help these days. Wait, that is much too large. Smaller, please, and in the corner. Good. Now how about some embers? Embers, please. Very good. Looks like we are all set for this monumental journey now. But first, if you would not mind liking and subscribing. It really helps us out more than you know. And drop a comment on what country you reside in, as we are always curious on where our viewers are from. Now, let's begin. Long before pirates had parrots or theme park rides, they had one simple goal: take stuff that wasn't nailed down. And if it was nailed down, well, bring a crowbar. The earliest pirates weren't swashbucklers. They were more like very salty burglars with boats. We're talking around 1300 BC. Ancient Mediterranean sailors realized that trade ships were basically floating vending machines, and nobody was guarding them after dark. Boom. Sea crime was born. It wasn't glamorous. These guys didn't wear eye patches for fashion. They wore them because someone hit them with an oar during a loot-related disagreement. The Greeks, the Romans, the Phoenicians, they all had pirate problems. You couldn't toss a toga without hitting a guy trying to steal your olive oil. Julius Caesar himself was once kidnapped by pirates. And not only did he get kidnapped, he got annoyed. He told them their ransom price was too low. After he was released, he hunted them down and had them executed. That's what we call customer feedback. But piracy wasn't just petty theft, it was a career path. If you couldn't farm, fish, or philosophize, you grabbed a sword, learned to row, and hoped someone dropped a crate of gold nearby. In the early days, pirate ships were tiny, cramped, and smelled like a mixture of wet dog, seaweed, and broken dreams. There were no rum rations or treasure maps. Most of them couldn't read, and if they had a map, it probably just said, "Try this way." And yet, the idea of sea raiding caught on. By the time the Byzantine Empire was up and running, piracy was basically its own job sector. Nations started building navies, not to explore, but to chase down guys named Nico, who kept stealing their cargo. Pirates didn't think of themselves as criminals. They thought of themselves as entrepreneurs with knives, and sometimes governments even agreed. If a country didn't like another country, it would quietly hire pirates to unofficially make trouble. This was the earliest form of plausible deniability. Oh no, our trade ships exploded, must have been a coincidence. As the centuries rolled on, piracy evolved from a desperate act to a full-blown lifestyle. Dirty, violent, sometimes profitable, but always dramatic. And this was only the beginning, because as Europe's empires started looking west, a new playground opened up, one full of ships, silver, and very confused locals. The golden age of piracy was on the horizon, but for now it all started with some ancient sailors, a few stolen amphoras, and the realization that crime floats. The golden age of piracy didn't arrive with fanfare. It showed up like a drunk uncle at a wedding, loud, chaotic, and missing a shoe. By the late 1600s, the Caribbean had become the world's unofficial pirate buffet. Spain had been hauling gold and silver out of the Americas for over a century, and every ship they loaded was a floating "Please rob me" sign. England, France, and the Netherlands weren't exactly innocent bystanders either. They were busy building colonies, stealing each other's maps and sending letters home that basically said, "Things are going great, please ignore the cannon fire." Enter the pirates. These weren't Royal Navy men gone rogue. They were jobless sailors, ex-privateers, and guys who had burned one too many bridges on land. Many had been hired to fight in wars, then dumped when peace broke out. With no pensions, no job offers, and no LinkedIn page to beg on, they took their talents to the high seas. And the Caribbean, that was the perfect place. Warm weather, endless targets, and rum that doubled as paint thinner. Pirate ships were floating democracies, probably the only ones in the 17th century. The crew voted on everything: who captained the ship, how loot was split, and whether Dave should be tied to the mast for snoring too loudly. Captains weren't kings, they were more like elected chaos managers. If they got too bossy, the crew could vote them out. Or overboard. The loot wasn't always gold and jewels. A pirate's haul could include spices, sugar, fabrics, barrels of fish, or the occasional crate of very surprised chickens. Once divided, each pirate got a share. Injuries came with compensation. Lose a leg, get extra money. Lose both legs. Congratulations, you're rich and mostly furniture. But piracy wasn't all cannonballs and coin counting. Life aboard was brutal. Food spoiled, fresh water turned into soup, disease spread faster than gossip, and any battle could end with you leaking from 6 new holes. Yet for some, it beat the alternative: poverty, prison, or ploughing someone else's fields. As more ships vanished and ports got nervous, colonial powers took notice. But for now, the pirates had found their stage. From Port Royal to Nassau, taverns echoed with laughter, lies, and the occasional chair-throwing contest. The seas were full of opportunity and very bad decisions, and business was booming. If you were looking for the Las Vegas of piracy, it was Port Royal, Jamaica. In the late 1600s, this place wasn't just wild, it was aggressively allergic to morals. Built on stolen land with stolen goods, Port Royal became a pirate playground where the rum never stopped flowing, the gambling tables groaned under the weight of bad bets, and public decency quietly packed its bags and left. It was so debauched that ministers called it the wickedest city on earth, which, coming from 17th century clergy, meant it was probably a pretty fun weekend. Pirates strolled through the streets like rock stars, muddy, sunburned rock stars who smelled like salted ham and had questionable dental plans. But in Port Royal, nobody cared. A man could drink an entire paycheck before noon, wake up married to someone he didn't remember meeting, and still be considered one of the more responsible citizens. Brothels outnumbered churches, and law enforcement had a flexible definition of justice, mostly based on whether or not you bought them a drink. This wasn't just chaos for chaos's sake. Port Royal thrived because it was useful. England saw pirates as unofficial saboteurs. If a privateer wrecked a Spanish galleon and brought the loot back to Jamaica, the British Crown might look the other way, or even send a thank you note. As long as someone else's empire was losing, it was basically diplomacy by cannonball. But all parties must end. In 1692, the earth itself decided Port Royal had had enough. An earthquake struck with biblical fury, dragging half the city into the sea. Buildings crumbled, streets vanished, and a good chunk of the pirate population ended up very suddenly underwater, rum and all. Survivors called it divine punishment. Others called it poor construction planning mixed with karma. Either way, Port Royal never recovered. Still, its legend lived on. Pirates scattered, but the spirit of lawless opportunity sailed with them. The earthquake didn't kill piracy, it just gave it a change of scenery. The Caribbean still had ports, rum, and targets, and soon a new breed of pirates would rise, meaner, bolder, and way more organized. The Golden Age wasn't over, it was just getting a fresh coat of seawater and bad decisions. With Port Royal now underwater and its surviving patrons blinking in the sunlight like hungover lobsters, piracy didn't fizzle, it franchised. What followed was the Golden Age's all-star lineup. These weren't just pirates. These were celebrities with a criminal record and boat access. If you didn't know their names, you probably knew their work, like stealing everything not nailed to a deck. First up, Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard. He looked like he lost a staring contest with a bonfire. Blackbeard was 6 feet of fear with a beard so dramatic it had its own weather system. He tied slow-burning fuses into his hair and lit them before battle. Why? Because nothing says negotiation like smoke coming out of your face. He didn't even need to fight most of the time. Just showing up like an angry chimney usually did the trick. Then there was Calico Jack Rackham, named for his flashy wardrobe and his complete inability to win battles. What he lacked in tactics, he made up for in marketing. His ship flew the now famous Skull and Crossbones flag because subtlety was for landlubbers. Jack also had excellent taste in company. 2 of his crew were women, Anne Bonny and Mary Red, who dressed like men, fought better than most of the crew, and had 0 time for anyone's nonsense. Anne once told her cowardly shipmates she was sorry they were all so boring, and went down swinging when they got caught. That's commitment. These weren't just thugs with swords, they were brands. Every pirate had a style. Some terrified their enemies into surrender. Others gave rousing speeches about freedom, brotherhood, and never paying for a drink again. Pirate crews were made up of misfits, outlaws, and guys who failed out of normal jobs. And somehow, it worked. They raided ships, charmed tavern owners, and dodged authorities like it was a sport. Their success wasn't just luck. European powers were busy fighting each other, too distracted to notice that their shipping lanes had turned into all-you-can-eat buffets. Pirates took advantage of every squabble. While kings signed treaties, pirates signed up for the next raid. And while armies wore itchy uniforms, pirates wore whatever didn't smell too awful that day. But fame is a tricky thing. The bigger these pirates got, the more wanted posters went up. Their faces, often wildly inaccurate drawings that made them look like sleepy potatoes, were plastered across every port. And with fame came attention, the bad kind, the kind that involves musket balls and angry governors. Still, for a moment in time, piracy had stars, slogans, and style. It was a rough, ridiculous golden age, and it had no idea its days were numbered. Sure, pirate life looked exciting, swords, treasure, dramatic wind in your coat, but the day-to-day reality was more damp chaos with scurvy. A pirate ship wasn't just a floating crime mobile, it was a democracy, a cafeteria, a courtroom, and a leaky nightmare all rolled into one. Pirates followed a code, and not the cool kind with secret symbols, more like a list of please don't stab each other before lunch agreements. The pirate code was serious business. It covered everything from how loot was split to who got what room, spoiler, no one, to how long you could sulk before someone slapped you with a fish. Breaking the rules could mean losing your share of treasure, or your ears. Pirates were big on consequences. You didn't get written up. You got tied up. Discipline came with a splash of drama. Minor offenses, you might get marooned, left alone on a sandy island with a bottle of water and your regrets. Major offenses, you might be keel-hauled, which is not a fancy Scandinavian massage. It's when they drag you under the boat until either you learn a lesson or become fish food. Meals on board were imaginative. Hardtack biscuits, salted meat, and whatever you could catch or didn't drop overboard. Hardtack was a brick disguised as food. It had the texture of drywall and the shelf life of revenge. Pirates would dunk it in beer to soften it. If it still cracked your tooth, congratulations. You are now part of the dental majority. Privacy didn't exist. You lived shoulder to shoulder with men who hadn't bathed in weeks and told the same joke every morning. Personal space was a barrel, literally. If you wanted to be alone, you sat in a barrel and pretended to be sorting something, and yet somehow these floating frat houses managed to pull off naval warfare. They practiced, sort of. Cannon drills involved yelling, shoving powder into tubes, and hoping Dave didn't light the fuse too early again. Sails were adjusted with teamwork, shouting, and a deep misunderstanding of knots. Navigation was done with the help of maps, stars, and the occasional wild guess. Pirates weren't trained seamen, they were stubborn ones. Despite the chaos, there was camaraderie. Pirate crews were built on loyalty, part fear, part friendship, part shared hatred of authority. Everyone had a role, even if that role was guy who plays the fiddle badly but keeps morale up. And in those rare, quiet nights, under stars that didn't charge rent, even the loudest pirates could get a little philosophical. Right before someone passed out face first in a barrel of pickles. This wasn't a fantasy, it was a floating, foul-smelling miracle of teamwork, ambition, and near-constant yelling. And it worked, most of the time. Until it didn't. Naval ships were floating bureaucracies. They had rules, uniforms, paperwork, and officers who yelled in 6-syllable words. A British warship might take 20 minutes just to turn around. Pirates could pivot like caffeinated ballerinas. Their ships were smaller, lighter, and not stuffed with 400 pounds of royal biscuits and powdered wigs. In a chase, pirates didn't wait for permission. They just raised the sails, cut the anchor, and prayed the wind wasn't in a sarcastic mood. Tactically, pirates played dirty and brilliantly. They didn't fight fair because fair fighting was for people who liked dying early. Pirates would fake distress, then ambush their rescuers. They'd use false flags, sneak attacks, or, if all else failed, just yell really loudly and hope the enemy tripped. A favorite move was intimidation before impact. If you could convince the other ship you were insane enough to fight with lit torches in your beard, most people surrendered politely and offered snacks. Boarding was their specialty. Pirates didn't duel across elegant decks. They swarmed like angry cats with knives. Naval officers were trained for polite combat with rules and whistles. Pirates were trained by desperation and gravity. They didn't care about medals. They cared about not dying and maybe getting a new coat. And then there was the attitude. Naval crews were often made up of press-ganged men who'd rather be anywhere else. Pirate crews? They chose this. They wanted the chaos, the loot, the chance to say avast without being judged. That morale difference was huge. One ship had orders, the other had ambition, and possibly rabies. Even when pirates lost, they did it with flair. There are stories of captains lighting their own ships on fire just to avoid capture. If I can't have it, no one can, but with more shouting and less insurance paperwork. The sheer unpredictability of pirates made them a nightmare for colonial powers. You couldn't reason with someone who once tried to rob a volcano for having too much smoke. Eventually, the powers that be tried to modernize. They built faster ships, trained better crews, and started to realize that yelling "stop" in the name of the king didn't work on people who hated the king. But for a while, pirates ruled not because they had more firepower, but because they had less to lose and zero patience for protocol. In the battle of order versus chaos, the chaos had better wind conditions. Let's talk treasure, because despite what every movie says, pirates weren't exactly swimming through gold coins like aquatic bankers. The real economy of piracy was way more chaotic, slightly disappointing, and surprisingly well organized for a profession built on theft and poor hygiene. Yes, there was treasure, but it didn't always sparkle. A pirate raid could net gold, silver, fine fabrics, exotic spices, barrels of booze, crates of nails, or even just a ship full of pigs. If it had value, they took it. If it squealed, they sold it. The dream was always Spanish treasure chest filled with cursed rubies. The reality? Congratulations, you're now the proud owner of 70 barrels of salted herring. Once back at port, or some conveniently lawless sandbar, the loot was divided, not randomly, not by who yelled the loudest. Pirates had math, they had shares. Captains usually got 2 shares. The quartermaster, basically the guy who yelled second loudest, got 1.5. The rest of the crew split equal shares unless someone had a missing leg, eye, or spleen, in which case they got a bonus for battle damage. Pirates had workers' comp before most governments did. There was no bank. Your retirement plan was whatever you didn't immediately drink, gamble, or accidentally throw into the ocean. Some pirates buried their gold, but mostly because hiding money from other pirates was safer than trusting anyone. Others spent their loot in days, waking up broke in a hammock with a new tattoo and a headache that smelled like pineapple. Pirate shopping trips were legendary: a fresh coat, a better hat, a sword that didn't bend when you sneezed, and rum. So much rum. Local taverns practically built their business models around Thursday night loot splurge. If pirates were in town, the economy spiked and furniture got broken. It was like payday at sea, except everyone had a weapon and zero impulse control. Occasionally, the loot was big, like buy your own island big. But usually it wasn't. A lot of piracy was based on volume, many small wins instead of one jackpot. That's why they hit so many ships. It was more Amazon Prime than Ocean's 11, and the risk was high. One storm, one ambush, one cannonball to the wrong barrel and poof, there goes your paycheck. Still, for many, it beat the alternatives. On land, you worked for scraps and prayed your boss didn't tax your chickens. On a pirate ship, you gambled big and sometimes won bigger. It was dangerous, it was unstable, it was sweaty. But every now and then, when the stars aligned and the captain didn't steer into a reef, you got paid in gold, or at least bacon. And in the end, it wasn't about treasure maps or chests under palm trees. It was about freedom, fast money, and the joy of telling someone, yes, I once stole 200 bolts of silk and a goat on the same day. Every outlaw needs a hideout. Batman had his cave. Pirates, they had Nassau, Tortuga, and whatever beach the Navy hadn't noticed yet. These weren't cities, they were controlled chaos with palm trees. Welcome to the pirate havens, where the rum was strong, the rules were weak, and do not disturb was just a suggestion shouted over a bar fight. Take Nassau on the island of New Providence. In the early 1700s, it was less a town and more a pirate Costco, everything you needed, sold by someone with an eye patch and a highly questionable backstory. Ships limped into port half-sinking and sailed out fully loaded, staffed by crews with names like One-Eyed Ned or that guy who smells like rum bread. Nassau had no real government. Unless you count the pirates themselves, who formed something resembling a democracy, if your idea of democracy involves sword-point voting and occasional chicken theft. They called it the Republic of Pirates, which sounds fancy until you realize their judicial system was mostly yelling and then flipping a coin. Tortuga, meanwhile, was France's contribution to tropical anarchy. It was a pirate-friendly island off the coast of Hispaniola, and by friendly, we mean it had taverns open 24/7, brothels with business cards, and a thriving trade in things that had definitely been stolen 5 minutes earlier. Pirates could show up, sell their loot, buy supplies, maybe lose a tooth in a game of dice, and head back out for more mischief by sunset. These pirate havens worked because nobody else wanted the job. Colonial powers were too busy fighting wars, managing sugar empires, and drafting extremely boring documents. Pirates filled the gap with enthusiasm, cannonballs, and a healthy disrespect for property lines. They built their own systems, handled their own disputes, and occasionally remembered to clean the fish guts off the dock. Law enforcement? Sparse. Corruption? Plentiful. You could bribe your way out of almost anything with a good story and a jug of something flammable. Some governors even played both sides, condemning piracy on paper while secretly collecting a "please ignore this ship full of stolen silver" fee. But the real draw of pirate havens wasn't just freedom. It was community. A ridiculous, rum-soaked, mostly shirtless community of people who didn't fit anywhere else. You had former slaves, ex-soldiers, failed farmers, escapees from really bad jobs, and people who just liked yelling yo-ho before breakfast. And for a few years, it worked. Of course, paradise has a shelf life. Too many ships burned, too many governors embarrassed, and suddenly the empires remembered they had navies. But for one chaotic, sunburned moment, pirates had their own cities, where no one asked for your resume, and your best friend might be named Pegleg Pete, who also moonlighted as the unofficial mayor. If you thought pirates were one big happy sea family, think again. Behind the grins, growls, and questionable tattoos was a web of alliances so shaky it made soap opera relationships look stable. Pirates didn't just fight navies, they fought each other, teamed up temporarily, then stabbed each other in the back using a spoon and a vague excuse about misunderstood treasure rights. Alliances at sea were built like cheap hammocks, held together by convenience, rum, and a mutual desire to not get blown up alone. Captains would meet in shady coves, exchange half-truths and promises, then sail off, swearing eternal loyalty, at least until someone found out one ship had a slightly better map. Loyalty lasted exactly as long as the loot did. One famous pairing was Blackbeard and Stader Bonnet, a sugar plantation owner who decided one day, you know what sounds better than slippers and wealth? Piracy. Bonnet was enthusiastic. He brought books on board, wore nice clothes, and had absolutely no clue what he was doing. Blackbeard basically adopted him like a confused sea intern, then borrowed Bonnet's ship when it was more useful than the man himself. Friendship. Pirate crews had more drama than a tavern full of poets. If you disagreed with your captain, you didn't file a complaint, you staged a mutiny. These could be peaceful, like voting someone off the boat. Or they could be very unpeaceful, like tying someone to the mast and using them as a hat rack. Trust was a luxury. Everyone kept one eye on the horizon and the other on their quartermaster's rum stash. Ships would split into factions. Half the crew might want to chase a merchant ship. The other half just wanted to stop for snacks. If the vote was close, arguments could erupt over charts, compass directions, or who got to name the next parrot. It was democracy by shouting, followed by a loud vote and possibly someone getting slapped with a boot. And then came the betrayals. Pirates who teamed up would sometimes accidentally forget to share the treasure. Or they'd attack their former allies mid-toast. To new beginnings, boom, cannonball to the stern. History is filled with pirate captains who trusted the wrong mustache, yet somehow it worked until it didn't. These short-term alliances allowed pirates to swarm bigger ships and overwhelm navy convoys, but they also led to spectacular failures when egos clashed or someone ran off with the only map that didn't point directly into a reef. Pirate politics was less chess and more drunken dodgeball. And while it made for incredible stories, it also meant pirates were often their own worst enemies. Well, them and scurvy. And maybe seagulls. Those birds are jerks. Let's take a moment to talk about pirate myths. Those charming, cinematic, totally wrong ideas that Hollywood loves and history face palms over. Because while the image of a pirate with a hook hand, a shoulder parrot, and a treasure map marked with an X is adorable, it's also about as historically accurate as a time-traveling mermaid with Wi-Fi. First, the eye patch. Yes, some pirates wore them, but not because it looked cool or made their Tinder profile interesting. The most likely reason? Night vision. Switching between bright sunlight on deck and pitch black below took time, and keeping one eye in the dark let them adjust faster. So yes, it was practical, but most pirates just had both eyes, and terrible opinions about hygiene. Then there's the whole buried treasure obsession. Truth is, pirates weren't in the long-term storage business. Most loot was spent within days, on rum, clothes, food, and occasionally something useful like a new boat or a new set of teeth. Buried treasure was mostly made up by books, particularly Treasure Island, which gave generations of kids very unrealistic career goals. Pirates didn't bury loot because they didn't trust dirt, or maps, or remembering things. And parrots? Possible, but not common. Exotic birds were sometimes sold or traded, but few pirates kept one perched on their shoulder 24/7. Birds bite, birds poop. A real pirate wouldn't risk getting pooped on during a dramatic speech. Most companions were rats, chickens, or fellow crew members, named something like Toothless Joe, who squawked enough on his own. Now let's address the infamous walking the plank. Sounds theatrical, looks great on screen, totally impractical. Pirates didn't waste time building diving boards for their enemies. If they wanted someone off the ship, they just tossed them overboard. No speech, no drum roll, just splash. Simple, effective, and with much less stage setup. Even pirate accents are mostly make-believe. That "our matey" voice? Blame a 1950s movie where an actor from the West Country of England just leaned into it. Real pirates had accents from everywhere. England, France, Africa, Spain, the Caribbean. It probably sounded like a chaotic international sandwich of shouting and sea curses. The truth? Real pirates were messy, angry, resourceful criminals who lived hard and died harder. They didn't monologue, they muttered. They didn't plan treasure hunts, they planned exits. And if they wore fancy hats, it was because someone else had the bad luck to wear it first. But hey, myths are fun. Just remember the next time you see a pirate balancing a map, a parrot, and a moral dilemma, it's probably fiction. The real pirate would have sold the map, cooked the parrot, and been halfway to another bad decision by noon. Think piracy was a boys-only club? Think again. While most history books were too busy drooling over Blackbeard's beard, some of the fiercest pirates at sea were women, and not just helping out. We're talking sword-swinging, ship-commanding, insult-hurling legends who made the men look like they were playing dress-up. Anne Bonny was one of the most infamous. Born in Ireland and raised in the colonies, she ditched her boring life, married a small-time pirate, then immediately upgraded to a much more dangerous one, Calico Jack Rackham. She dressed like a man, fought like a lunatic, and swore like 10 sailors with stubbed toes. She once reportedly told captured enemies, "If you'd fought like men, you wouldn't be hanging like dogs." That's not banter, that's a mic drop before microphones existed. Then there was Mary Read. She started out disguised as a boy to get by in the world, joined the military, then took a hard left turn into piracy because why not? When she joined Calico Jack's crew, Anne Bonny was the only one who knew she was a woman until Mary stabbed a few people and everyone decided not to ask questions. The best part? When their ship was finally captured, the women held their ground while the men cowered below deck, hoping the problem would go away. Anne and Mary fought like lions, Jack Rackham reportedly tried to disappear into the furniture. It didn't work. The whole crew was arrested, and Anne's final words to Jack: "Sorry, but if you'd fought like a man, you wouldn't be here." Ice cold. These women weren't sidekicks, they weren't exceptions, they were legends. They shattered gender norms with cannon fire, challenged laws by breaking all of them, and proved that swashbuckling wasn't just for the boys. And they did it while being massively outnumbered, constantly underestimated, and usually covered in someone else's blood. History tried to forget them. But real pirate stories have a way of floating back up, especially the ones with swords, sass, and a complete disregard for polite society. So next time someone says pirates were all bearded men with barrel guts and bad breath, remind them sometimes the scariest person on the ship wore a corset under her coat and had absolutely nothing left to prove. Pirate justice wasn't exactly subtle. There were no courtrooms, no powdered wigs, and definitely no one shouting objection while waving papers. If you broke the rules at sea, whether pirate or not, you were about to experience a form of justice that was equal parts creative and horrifying, usually soaked in rum and very poor decision-making. Let's start with marooning. It sounds like a tropical vacation until you realize it involved zero sunscreen and a lot of slow starvation. Pirates who broke the code, stole from the crew, or just annoyed the wrong person could be left on a deserted island with nothing but a flask of water, a pistol with one bullet, and the soul-crushing realization that coconuts don't listen to apologies. Then there was flogging, basically being whipped with a rope until your back looked like abstract art. It was a favorite on Navy ships too, where discipline was prized, and empathy had taken a long walk off a short plank. Captains could order lashings for crimes like disobedience, drunkenness, or being awake in the captain's line of sight for too long. Speaking of planks, walking them wasn't common but not impossible. Pirates were practical. Why build a diving platform when a shove worked just fine? Still, it happened occasionally, more for the dramatic effect than efficiency, because nothing says we mean business like making someone do slow-motion theatre before their doom. Hanging was the big finale. If pirates were caught by the authorities, the trial was usually quick, the verdict was guilty, and the sentence was hanging, preferably in public. Sometimes they were left dangling in gibbets, metal cages, by the shoreline, as a friendly reminder that crime doesn't pay, but it does rot. Ironically, pirate crews often treated their own better than most navies did. They had compensation for injuries, voted on leadership, and shared loot fairly. But step out of line and pirate justice came crashing down with all the mercy of a cannonball to the knees. Mutiny, death, stealing extra rum, flogged, singing off-key during a storm, probably just yelled at, but it depended on the storm. Naval captains, on the other hand, ruled like mini-dictators. Sailors had no say. Punishments were brutal, frequent, and sometimes delivered just to remind everyone who was in charge. One wrong look, and suddenly you were polishing the deck with your teeth. So while pirates were criminals, they were weirdly democratic criminals who believed in fairness until someone made them mad. Then it was swift, painful, and usually involved ropes. Because at sea, justice wasn't blind. It was sunburned, sarcastic, and carried a very large stick. If you were a merchant sailor in the 1700s and saw a black flag with a skull on it, you had two options: run or start regretting every life decision that led you to that moment. Pirate flags weren't just decoration, they were floating threats, giant fabric warnings that said, "Hi there, we're here to ruin your day." The most famous was the Jolly Roger, black background, white skull and crossbones, zero chill. But there wasn't just one Jolly Roger. Pirates were surprisingly into graphic design. Some added hourglasses, tick-tock, you're running out of time. Bleeding hearts, emotional. And violent, or skeletons holding spears and martinis made of doom. The goal wasn't subtlety, it was psychological warfare with thread. These flags were the original branding. Each pirate captain had a design, part signature, part threat, part mood board. Some featured entire skeletons doing calisthenics with swords. Others had red flags which meant no mercy, also known as "we tried polite last week, it didn't work." Red flags were basically the pirate version of yelling surprise and then setting your furniture on fire. Pirate crews loved their flags. They stitched them by hand, which meant some were a little interpretive. Skulls looked like potatoes. Swords bent in the breeze. But the message was clear: surrender now, or things get loud and explodey. Once that flag went up, the merchant ship had seconds to decide whether to fight, flee, or faint. Some pirates kept multiple flags for dramatic effect. They'd fly a false one to sneak up, then suddenly switch to the Jolly Roger like a magician revealing a sword. It was the ultimate power move, surprise terror with bonus flair. Think of it as the 18th century version of pulling off sunglasses dramatically before a car chase. And make no mistake, those flags worked. A ship that might fight off a navy vessel would surrender to pirates just to avoid whatever creative madness was about to unfold. Better to lose your cargo than lose a limb, or get stuck listening to Toothless Jim recite sea poetry during a raid. Flags also made it personal. Sailors learned which symbols belonged to which captains. Seeing a familiar, terrifying flag on the horizon was like watching your ex show up at your wedding with a cannon. It meant someone specific was coming and they'd brought friends. Of course, governments hated these flags. They represented chaos, rebellion, and a direct challenge to the idea that only royal navies got to be scary, so they banned them, hunted them, and burned them. But pirates didn't care, because as long as that flag flapped in the wind, it meant they were still out there, laughing, raiding, and looking fabulous while doing it. Let's talk pirate medicine, also known as good luck, hope you don't die. Life at sea was dangerous enough, but if you happened to catch a cannonball with your thigh or develop a rash that glowed in the dark, your options were limited. Pirate healthcare was less science and more experimental screaming. Start with surgery. Most pirate ships didn't have doctors. They had a guy with a strong stomach and access to a rusty saw. Amputation? Very popular. If something looked infected, off it went. Anesthetics? Nope. Maybe some rum. Maybe a stick to bite. Maybe just your crewmates yelling, "Hold still," while someone with questionable eyesight hacked through your leg like they were building a chair. Wounds were cleaned with seawater, which is just bacteria soup, with extra salt. Bandages were made from old shirts, sailcloth, or whatever fabric wasn't already being worn or on fire. Infection was not just a possibility, it was practically a guarantee. Pirate survival rates depended entirely on how stubborn your immune system was and whether your crewmates remembered which limb to cut off. Then there were the remedies. Got a fever? Drink some vinegar and lie in the sun until you hallucinate a better doctor. Scurvy? Try gnawing on a lemon if you could find one, and hope your teeth didn't fall out first. Toothache? Just pull the tooth with pliers and scream into the void. Internal bleeding? Say a prayer, drink rum, and prepare a dramatic farewell speech. One famous remedy for syphilis involved mercury, which, fun fact, is poison. But it did distract you from the original symptoms by giving you new ones, like tremors, sweating, and slowly turning into a very confused statue. It was like fighting fire with napalm and then blaming the wind. Of course, pirates also used folk cures, herbs, poultices, spells, and whispered advice from that one sailor who swore he learned medicine from a goat. Sometimes it worked, mostly it didn't. Pirate medicine books were usually just a list of things that might not kill you immediately, followed by a sketch of a skeleton and a question mark. Hygiene? Don't ask. Baths were rare. Soap was a rumor. And if someone had lice, well, now everyone had lice. Pirates would sometimes shave their heads to avoid infestations, though many just lived with the bugs and named them. Smelling bad was so common, it was practically a personality trait. And yet some pirates survived, missing limbs, crooked noses, wheezing lungs, but alive. They wore their scars like medals and made up much better stories about how they got them. Cannon blast at midnight sounded way cooler than tripped over a barrel during a sneeze. So while pirate medicine wasn't exactly cutting edge, it was unforgettable. Equal parts guts, grit, and guesswork, served with a side of mouldy bread and denial. Pirates weren't just violent thieves with a taste for rum. They were superstitious violent thieves with a taste for rum. Life at sea was unpredictable, terrifying, and mostly damp, so naturally, pirates clung to weird rituals, omens, and sea legends with the kind of conviction usually reserved for cult leaders or people trying to beat traffic with astrology. Start with bananas. Yes, bananas. Sailors believed bringing them on board cursed the whole voyage. Why? Several reasons. Some said banana peels made the deck slippery. Others claimed bananas released gases that spoiled other cargo, but mostly it's because if you were transporting bananas in the 1700s, you were probably transporting spiders too, and nobody wants surprise spiders during breakfast. Whistling? Absolutely not. Whistling on a ship was believed to whistle up the wind, and not in a helpful way. Bad weather, bad luck, and possibly being eaten by a kraken were all blamed on some cheerful fool whistling near the sails. If you needed to express joy, you were better off nodding silently and pretending to frown. Women on board, taboo. Not because pirates were all bachelors, though most were, but because women were said to anger the sea. Apparently Poseidon had strong opinions about workplace diversity. Ironically, some of the best pirates were women, disguised or not, which made this superstition both sexist and incredibly inaccurate. But facts rarely get in the way of superstition. Albatrosses were sacred. You did not mess with them. Killing an albatross was like insulting the ocean's emotional support animal. Do it, and you were cursed forever, or at least until something heavy fell on you. On the flip side, seeing dolphins was good luck. Seeing a shark? Less so unless you were planning to lose a crewmate soon. Pirates also had personal talismans, rabbit feet, lucky coins, locks of hair, or that one sock they'd worn through 3 hurricanes. Some carved charms from bone or coral. Others just talked to their weapons like old friends and hoped the muskets still liked them back. Rituals before battle ranged from shouting nonsense words to kissing the ship's mast and growling at the horizon like it owed them money. Changing a ship's name? Don't even think about it. That was the nautical equivalent of walking under every ladder while smashing mirrors with a black cat. A renamed ship had to be ritually cleansed, which involved ceremonies, sacrifices, and probably someone falling overboard mid-speech. And don't forget omens. Red sunsets were good. Dead rats were bad. Hearing voices in the wind, probably sleep deprivation, but definitely a sign to drink more rum and avoid responsibility. In short, pirate life was 10% sailing, 20% violence, and 70% avoiding invisible curses. Their code of conduct may have been rough, but their belief system was oddly specific. Because when you spend months surrounded by water, armed men, and mouldy biscuits, you start looking for luck anywhere you can find it. When pirates fought, it wasn't neat, it wasn't strategic. It was a floating dumpster fire full of yelling splinters and the occasional flaming chicken. Naval battles were chaotic enough, but pirate battles were pure mayhem, powered by desperation, broken ropes, and very loud disagreements about loot ownership. First, the approach. Pirates didn't stroll up politely. They charged in, sails full, flags flying, hoping to scare their target into surrendering before a single shot was fired. Surprise was everything. Sneak up with a false flag, get close enough, then unleash chaos. If the enemy was smart, they gave up. If not, things got loud fast. Cannons were the opening act. Huge, clunky tubes of noise and smoke that fired iron balls capable of turning a deck into wooden soup. Reloading took time, sweat, and the ability to ignore the guy next to you screaming in Latin for some reason. Accuracy was optional. Half the time they just aimed in the general direction and hoped something exploded. If it did, great. If it didn't, they blamed Dave. Then came the boarding. This was the main event. Pirates swung across on ropes, climbed over railings, or just leapt like angry goats with knives, gunpowder pistols, swords, axes, and fists. Whatever worked. It was less strategy, more sprint at the nearest person and yell something vaguely threatening. Fighting on a deck was slippery, loud, and full of hazards like ropes, holes, and crewmates who hadn't figured out left from right. Pirates weren't trained duelists, they were brawlers. If you stayed upright and didn't accidentally stab your own foot, you were considered skilled. Naval officers might have had formations and calls, but pirate crews communicated through yells, whistles, and meaningful eyebrow gestures. If someone yelled duck, it could mean cannon incoming, or that there was actually a duck on board again. Clarity was not their strong point. Casualties were common, but weirdly, pirates tried not to kill more than necessary. Dead men don't carry loot. Captains often offered a chance to surrender mid-battle. Many took it, especially after seeing a pirate with no shirt, 3 scars, and a facial expression that screamed, "I eat nails recreationally." And once the fight ended, loot time. Pirates would cheer, argue over who actually did the most stabbing, and start dragging cargo aboard. If the enemy ship was usable, they took it. If not, they stripped it, set it on fire for fun, and sailed away singing horribly off-key. Some battles were legendary, entire days of chasing, blasting, and yelling across the waves. Others lasted minutes. A single cannonball, a well-timed threat, or the sudden realization that your crew was 80% hungover could end it fast. Pirate battles weren't pretty, but they were effective, raw, reckless, and very loud. A mix of bravery, stupidity, and the occasional genius move made under extreme duress. And for pirates, it wasn't just about winning, it was about surviving, looting, and getting back to port in time for a drink and a story they could wildly exaggerate for the next 3 years. Let's talk pirate ships, the loud, leaky stars of the whole operation. Pirates didn't custom order their vessels with gold trim and flame decals. They stole what they could, modified it with rope, luck, and whatever wood wasn't already infested with sea termites, and hoped it stayed afloat long enough to rob someone else. The most popular pirate ship? The sloop. Fast, agile, and easy to handle, especially if your crew was small, drunk, or prone to getting distracted by shiny things. Sloops could dart between islands, escape larger ships, and park in shallow waters. Think of them as the sports cars of the high seas if sports cars occasionally exploded and had no brakes. Then there were brigantines, bigger with more firepower and room for loot. A brigantine was perfect if you had a large crew, bigger targets, and the desire to carry more than just regret. Pirates loved these because they could haul cannons, hammocks, and a suspicious amount of tropical fruit for people who hated vitamins. Most pirate ships started their careers as merchant vessels, peaceful, innocent, and deeply unprepared for the life of crime that awaited them. Pirates captured them, stripped off the decorative nonsense, added more cannons than was remotely safe, and repainted them in intimidating shades of nightmare. One popular design choice, black sails, totally impractical, but very spooky, and pirates loved spooky. Interior design was minimal, cramped sleeping quarters, barrels stacked like a game of nautical Jenga, and hammocks swinging violently during storms. Cleanliness was rare. Mold was a roommate. And if the ship didn't leak, it was considered a miracle and given a name like the Blessed Sponge or definitely not sinking. Upgrades were DIY nightmares. Cannons were bolted wherever they fit. Trapdoors were added in places they absolutely shouldn't be. Sometimes pirates would cut extra hatches into the hull to improve boarding, or just because someone had an axe and was feeling artistic. Safety inspections were not a thing. Naming the ship was important. Names like Queen Anne's Revenge or Revenge of the Revenge let everyone know you meant business. Some were named after ex-lovers, terrifying concepts, or whatever sounded cool while shouting over wind. A favorite pastime? Renaming the ship after stealing it. It didn't confuse the enemy much, but it made pirates feel fancy. Despite their flaws, these ships worked. They were fast, scary, and flexible enough to chase a Spanish galleon or outrun a royal warship. Pirates knew every creak and groan, patched them with everything from canvas to curses, and treated them like floating family members, unreliable, loud, but deeply loved. In the end, pirate ships weren't perfect, but they didn't need to be. They just needed to float, hold loot, and make a dramatic silhouette against the sunset, while someone shouted, "Hoist the thing!" and pointed in the general direction of chaos. Believe it or not, some pirates actually retired. Not many, but enough to make you wonder what kind of resume they handed in. Skills, sword fighting, treasure redistribution, mildly haunted. Most pirates didn't plan for retirement, they planned for Thursday. But every once in a while, a sea rogue decided it was time to hang up the cutlass and maybe open a tavern or invent indoor shoes. Retirement options varied. Some pirates tried to blend back into society by pretending they were former sailors with very specific treasure chests. Others got clever. They bought land, changed names, and suddenly became respected gentlemen with an impressive amount of silverware for someone who used to yell "Avast" before breakfast. Then there were the lucky ones who were offered retirement by the government. In the early 1700s, as piracy became too much of an international embarrassment, the British Crown came up with the King's Pardon. Basically, if you stop pirating, we won't hang you. Maybe. Thousands of pirates accepted. Some actually meant it. Others nodded politely, buried their flag under a tree, and went right back to plundering after lunch. Famous pirate Benjamin Hornigold took the pardon and later spent his golden years hunting other pirates, including his former crewmates. Imagine being the guy who shows up at the reunion with a warrant and says, "So anyway, you're under arrest." That's not betrayal, that's professional whiplash. Of course, many didn't get to retire, they got caught. The retirement package involved a rope and a short drop. Pirate trials were usually quick and very one-sided. Juries didn't love swashbucklers, especially ones who accidentally burned down a dock or stole someone's decorative goat. A few pirates tried fake deaths, disappearing into legend. Some succeeded, others resurfaced because they couldn't resist buying the biggest hat in town and loudly demanding the usual at a tavern they weren't supposed to visit. Even the quiet exits weren't always peaceful. Former pirates found land life dull. No more horizon, no more sails. Just taxes, nosy neighbors, and the crushing realization that nobody wants to hear your story about outrunning a hurricane on a stolen canoe for the 20th time. But some found peace. They raised families, wrote memoirs, or paid someone to spell for them, and spent their days yelling at clouds from their porches. They became legends in retirement homes, still salty, still loud, but slightly less stabby. In the end, pirate retirement was rare, messy, and unpredictable, much like their lives. Whether they went out in a blaze of cannon smoke or faded quietly into history, one thing was certain: pirates didn't retire like anyone else. They just stopped causing trouble long enough to be remembered for it. Eventually, the party had to end, and it ended with warships, angry governors, and an international "please stop embarrassing us" memo. The golden age of piracy didn't fade away with a dramatic sunset and a sad sea shanty. It was hunted down, blown up, bribed, and buried by empires that had finally run out of patience and treasure. The problem was, pirates had gotten too good at their job. They weren't just annoying anymore, they were an economic disaster. Merchant losses were stacking up like soggy shipping logs. Insurance companies were sweating. Colonial governors were fielding angry letters written with so much ink they were basically threats in cursive. So governments did what governments do, overreacted with enthusiasm. England, Spain, France, and the Dutch all started sending more ships. Not the slow kind, but sleek, cannon-packed nightmare machines. They beefed up navies, paid better crews, and finally realized that pirate hunting required more than one guy with a spyglass and a bad attitude. Pirate havens like Nassau were shut down or reacquired at cannon point. Once lax ports suddenly had rules, guards, and a deep suspicion of anyone who smelled like rum and bad decisions. The pirates who stayed behind found themselves less welcome and more wanted. Literally, there were posters with rewards and very imaginative sketches that made them all look like angry potatoes with hats. Some pirates tried to fight. Big mistake. Naval ships were stronger, better trained, and had this annoying habit of coordinating their attacks. Pirates had flair, but the Royal Navy had discipline and fewer hangovers. Famous captains like Charles Vane, Calico Jack Rackham, and even Blackbeard himself were hunted down in spectacular, sometimes slightly over-the-top fashion. Blackbeard, for instance, was shot, stabbed, and then decapitated, just to be extra sure. Others took the king's pardon while it was still warm. A few switched sides entirely, becoming pirate hunters for the very governments they once mocked. That's like robbing a bank on Monday and managing it by Friday. Confusing, but very on brand for pirate logic. By the 1730s, piracy in the Atlantic had mostly dried up. The Golden Age was over. The sea didn't get safer overnight, but it got quieter. The pirates who survived either vanished into history, got real jobs, shocking, or became legends, exaggerated into immortality by writers, artists, and every child who's ever yelled "ah" at a seagull. So how did it end? Not with a bang, but with bureaucracy, cannonballs, and a whole lot of wanted posters. It turns out even pirates can't outrun paperwork forever. Pirates, for all their crimes, chaos, and questionable dental hygiene, didn't really die. Sure, their ships sank, their captains were hanged, and their rum ran dry. But the idea of pirates, that refused to walk the plank. Somehow, these filthy, violent sea bandits became cultural superheroes with funny accents and a love for accessorizing. The real pirates were scary. They were unpredictable. They robbed, kidnapped, and occasionally threw cannonballs at people for fun. But give it a few centuries, and suddenly they're fun-loving rogues with twinkly eyes and secret hearts of gold. History forgot the lice and remembered the hats. We've got pirates in books, movies, theme parks, even cereal boxes. They've become symbols of rebellion, freedom, and let's ignore consequences for a while. Never mind that most real pirates would have stolen your shoes and sold your parrot for sandwich money. In fiction, they're lovable scamps with treasure maps and impeccable timing. Why the glow-up? Because pirates lived loud and died louder. They were bold in a world that told people to sit down and behave. They chose freedom over law, adventure over safety, and swords over polite conversation. And even if they smelled like old fish and made questionable life choices, that wild defiance still speaks to something deep in the human brain, the urge to shout, "No thanks," and sail off into the unknown. Of course, the reality was harsher. Most pirates didn't get buried treasure. They got buried, full stop. Life at sea was brutal, short, and rarely came with a musical number. But the stories? Oh, the stories stuck. They got retold, reshaped, and eventually glitter-glued into something mythic. Now, pirate means a dozen things. It's a Halloween costume, a sports team mascot, a metaphor for boldness, mischief, and maybe a little charm. We've taken something grimy and made it sparkle, like putting a crown on a crab and calling it royalty. But honestly, with the pirate's mind, probably not. They'd just ask for a cut of the profits. So the next time you see a skull and crossbones or hear someone yell, "Ahoy," remember? Beneath the jokes and plastic swords, there was once a real person, tired, sunburned, probably wounded, chasing one more ship and one more shot at a better life. Their world is gone, but their legend sails on. Not bad for a bunch of outlaws with terrible aim and a talent for storytelling. Let's be honest, pirates probably didn't say "ah" every other sentence. But that hasn't stopped the entire planet from doing it every September 19th, like it's a sacred ritual. Yes, Talk Like a Pirate Day is real. And if that doesn't prove the lasting linguistic legacy of pirates, nothing will. Truth is, pirate speech as we imagine it is mostly a Hollywood remix of West Country English accents, sailor jargon, and the verbal swagger of people who spent too much time shouting over cannon fire. The classic "ah," popularized by actor Robert Newton in the 1950 movie Treasure Island. He leaned into his thick Cornish accent and rolled his R's so hard they nearly circled back and slapped him. Audiences loved it, and suddenly that sound became the official dialect of sea-based crime. But pirates did have their own lingo, gruff, practical, and often made up on the spot. Avast meant stop. Ahoy meant hello, goodbye, or you're standing on my foot. Scuttle meant sink the ship. Booty meant treasure, not whatever it means now. Landlubber was anyone who couldn't handle life at sea, which included most people who enjoyed hygiene and stable ground. Phrases like "shiver me timbers" likely came from real nautical exclamations. Ships under cannon fire would shake violently, hence timbers shivering. But over time, the phrase evolved from "we're all gonna die" to "I'm surprised" and mildly inconvenienced. Language is weird like that. What's funny is how many piratey terms have stuck around. We still use "under the weather," originally a sailor feeling sick below deck, "three sheets to the wind," drunk, and "blow me down," surprised, not a wind advisory. Even chewing the fat came from sailors talking while slicing through preserved meat. Pirates helped shape casual conversation, even if they didn't mean to. Today, pirate speak is mostly fun. It's party talk. It's how grown adults justify wearing eye patches while holding turkey legs at Renaissance fairs. But underneath the silliness is a salty, battered, oddly poetic reflection of life at sea, loud, dangerous, and full of colourfully grumpy metaphors. So no, pirates probably didn't sound exactly like Captain Crunch, but their words, real and imagined, sailed into our vocabularies and dropped anchor. And that, me hearties, is what we call a linguistic legacy. In the end, pirates became more than men, more than mutineers with swords and sunburns. They became a kind of myth, a story whispered across centuries, stitched into flags, shouted at costume parties, and scribbled into children's notebooks beside dreams of treasure and freedom. What started as desperate men in stolen boats became legends large enough to outlive empires. They were never saints. They didn't claim to be. Pirates were violent, reckless, full of contradictions, loyal to each other, ruthless to strangers, both savage and strangely democratic. They created floating societies where kings held no power, and a man could rise not by birth, but by bravery, boldness, or sheer volume of yelling. In a world locked down by rules, they chose to live by their own. And that choice, dangerous, doomed, yet dazzling, echoes. It's why we still dress like them, talk like them. Imagine faraway islands with golden secrets buried beneath palm trees. We aren't drawn to their crimes, we're drawn to their defiance, the courage to stand against giants, to laugh at law, to point their ships toward the horizon and say, no map, no plan, perfect. History tried to erase them. Governments hung them, historians scolded them, and mothers warned children never to sail with them. But pirates never really needed permission to be remembered. Their sails may be gone, their ships rotted into coral, but their spirit, it found wind in other ways, in stories, in symbols, in that feeling deep in your chest when you wonder what it would be like to leave everything behind and chase something dangerous and free. We turn them into characters, yes, but maybe that's the point. We made them immortal. Every flag-waving skull and crossbones is a rebellion in cloth. Every "ah" shouted into the wind is a toast to chaos. And every time someone dreams of breaking the rules, not for greed, but for glory, they're channeling the ghost of some barefoot outlaw who once stood at the helm of a creaking ship and smiled into the storm. So this is where the journey ends, not at the gallows, not at the bottom of the sea, but somewhere higher, in the air, in the legend, in the space between truth and tale. The golden age of piracy is over, but the idea, that sails on forever, and that perhaps is the greatest treasure of all. You are still here, my friend? I can't believe it. This didn't help you fall asleep? Well, I will try harder in the next one to achieve that. You deserve a gold star. You are a trooper. Type gold star in the comments below, and we'll know you made it to the end. I'm sure not many did. Good night, my friend, and thanks again for tuning in.